All right, I'll call to order this meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee on Wednesday, February 5th, 2020 in the Triton High School Library at 7 p.m. This meeting is being audio and video recorded. I'll read aloud the vision statement. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families and the wider community, who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners, students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So first of all, we have a new face at the table. So congratulations, Kyle, on your first official school committee meeting. May this be the most exciting one of your life because we want to go downhill from here, not uphill as far as the excitement goes. Well, probably will. So just a quick recap of where we are. This is the traditional February budget meeting that comes before we vote the tentative budget in the middle of February. So that vote will be on February 12th. We have had a chance to discuss the budget with the towns. We've met in a workshop. We've had presentations from all of the, and I'm going backwards here, we've had presentations from all of the program heads and the principals. So we've been through quite a bit already, and this will be a night, I believe, of finessing the numbers that we already had and getting updates on what's coming down the road. One quick item of note is that the Triton CPAC is being reformed, which is good news. Yes, yeah. So thank you to the parents that are stepping forward to that. They have the IEP, the regular IEP and parents' rights meeting that we hold annually scheduled. It's on this Monday, February 10th at 6:30, and the CPAC is going to meet at 6 o'clock before that here in the library so that they can start to form around the parent or parents that have stepped forward to redo it. And they've started a Facebook page. They've started putting it out as events. So that's tremendous. I just hats off to them for getting that going again because it's been a long time coming. So, all right. Oral communications from the public. All right. Seeing none. Yeah. Oh, Bernie's got something to say. If you could state your name and address. Oh yeah, I think it's on. It almost sounded.
It is now.
Yep,
Bernie Cullen, 283 Wethersfield Street. I know we have 3 minutes to speak. I'd like to reserve that time for the end of this session because I don't know what this content of this meeting is, and I don't have anything at this point, but something may come up as the discussion goes forward. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
I appreciate that. We had actually had that raised by one of the members, and I had contacted Policy and Advocacy to ask them to take it up because our policy right now states that it's at the beginning of the session. So hopefully we'll be able to have that down the road, but for right now, it is what it is in the agenda. That's the placement of it. We do have a public hearing coming up, it's true. All right, review of the regional agreement. So this is my bad because I was thinking that we were going to have the notes from the DCC in tonight, which we don't. Yes. You were not thinking that. I was thinking that. Yes. So I'll just summarize this really quickly. So we've been talking about the incurring debt section. This is the section that keeps coming back from the regional agreement. At the Raleigh Board of Selectmen's meeting, would have been not this past Monday, but the Monday before, they raised the idea of putting some additional language into the regional agreement, or making the suggestion to put that additional language into the regional agreement. The current regional agreement and the way that Mass General Law works, there are two different ways to incur debt. There's Chapter 71, Section 16D, and Chapter 71, Section 16N. Chapter 71, Section 16D allows, has the school committee notifying the town when we take a vote to incur debt, and then they have 60 days to hold a town meeting to disapprove the incurring of that debt if they so choose. So they could choose to not hold a town meeting, and the debt is incurred. And my understanding is that often happens where it's a relatively small amount of debt and it doesn't make sense for it to go to a town meeting. So you have $40,000 worth of a repair to make. That gets divided amongst your 3 towns as far as the assessments go. And they look at that number and say, you know, that's something that we can easily accommodate within our given budget for our portion of it. There's no reason to hold a town meeting. And they opt to not do that because there is a cost incurred when you do hold a town meeting. And then for a bigger debt, they would often hold that town meeting. What was brought up by the by town council and by the Raleigh Board of Selectmen was that very often the vote is a contingent vote. So they say, we're going to, basically the article says that it gets approved at the town meeting, when they hold that town meeting, but it's contingent upon an override passing at the ballot. So they hold the town meeting, the question passes, and it has to pass by a two-thirds rather than a full majority, and then it goes to to a ballot box for the debt exclusion to be passed by the majority of voters at that election. That's, of course, not accounted for in the way that Chapter 71, Section 16D is written. The selectmen had asked to add, and I'll send you out a copy of it, and it'll also be in the notes. I apologize, I thought those notes were going to be in tonight because we were...
That's next week's agenda.
That is
So
next
all
week's
of that's
agenda,
on
I
next
know.
week's agenda.
But we said that this needed to come here so that we could talk about it as soon as possible. So I can read aloud real quick the summary, and this came to you in the DCC packet from last week. The language that they would like to add says, for the purposes of Mass General Law, Chapter 71, Section 16D, if a member town holds a town meeting which approves the amount of the debt authorized by the district committee, but such approval is contingent upon the town's voting to approve a Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion referendum question at a town election, the said town meeting vote shall be deemed to be a vote disapproving the amount of the debt if the said debt exclusion referendum is not passed by a majority of those voting within blank days after such a town meeting vote. So that accommodates that idea of a contingent appropriation. The debt exclusion law, my understanding is it provides for 90 days after that town meeting for them to hold the referendum vote and have that passed. So they were looking for a number in there. So I think there was 2 questions here. One of them is, what does DESE think about this, right? Because we always have to go back to DESE. And then what does the school committee think about this? So I went back to DESE because that was the easiest one. I could get to them literally the next day after all the towns voiced interest in this particular set of language. They said that they needed to pass it by their legal team. They had not received any questions on this before. They do not know of any regional agreements that this language is similar language is included in. So at that point, we said, yes, please go run it by your legal team. I'm still waiting for a response back from them. That was last Thursday morning. I haven't heard back yet. So hopefully that won't be too much longer. But my question for the committee is, this language seems to accommodate what's always happened in the past. Our towns have done this for a long period of time. It is written into the debt exclusion law that they have the ability to do a contingent appropriation article. So it's fully allowed by MGL. Do we have any concerns if DESE Legal says this could be passed about putting this in the regional agreement? Because if there are concerns about it, I want to voice those up front because that's something we need to address.
I don't necessarily have any concerns over it, but I'm confused as to what's on the agenda for next week's meeting. If this is on the agenda for next week's meeting, should this be taken up at next week's meeting?
It's not on the agenda for next week's meeting. The next week's meeting has the DCC notes in it, though, which is what I thought was coming tonight because the DCC notes have this language in it. They're in the
I
notes.
have no concerns with that.
Okay. It was just the backup and the item on the agenda didn't get synced because we've been dealing with multiple agendas at the same time. Yeah.
I was just going to say, if DESE comes back and says that it's okay, I have no problems with it.
Okay. Anybody else have feedback? Okay. And my apologies again for that. Okay. Crest Collaborative property purchase. This is part of what you received in your packet tonight. It's stapled to the agenda, and Brian's going to.
Yeah, so you received a letter from Kim Oliveira, who's the executive director of Crest Collaborative. You remember we're part of the Crest Collaborative, and we're part of North Shore Consortium. North Shore Consortium owns the majority of its properties and has some in other leased spaces. Crest has been in a transition. They were based on Broadway in Methuen, had a very, very old building. They've been in process, and so currently there is still some programming on Broadway in Methuen, which is Route 28, and then they have another space that they're leasing at 9 Branch Street in Methuen. The board, obviously I'm on the board, over the last 2 years we've been reviewing this, looking to get all of their programming on one campus. That's better for the students, that's better for efficiencies, for costs. Have been looking at lots of different options to sell property, to sublet. So the current plan, as it outlines in that letter, is there's a board meeting next Tuesday, the 11th, which is prior to next week's regular business meeting, but I wanted your input. I carry the vote as the board member. The letter that's in your packet is provided to you for information. I wanted to have this discussion prior to next Tuesday so that when I cast a vote in regards to next steps, I'm understanding what your beliefs are. So the thinking behind this is the property at Branch Street would actually be subleased. The property at Broadway is under agreement to be purchased. All in, even if they had to eat the cost of the existing lease and the new loan for the new property, which is the 20 Shattuck Road, right? Isn't that the name? They would still be only slightly higher than they are now. Working with a property manager, they believe they can recoup at least 50%, if not 75% of their lease costs through subletting, which would mean they're break even, and then in 5 years, when that lease is done, they're significantly less costs to run the operational side of the collaborative compared to where they're at now. So this has been something we've been discussing for 2 years. Next week is the vote to move forward with the financing options. We're still waiting to hear final numbers from Eric Bose, who's their business manager, in regards to various banks that they've heard from, who is going to give them the best rates, the best terms, 20, 30, 35, looking at various options. But didn't know if anyone had any. I know we don't speak about this a lot, so I don't think you have a lot of context, but if there is any opinion, I would certainly love to know that now before I cast a vote next Tuesday.
Since this would be a financial matter for them, would there be any impact as to any passing on of costs to member districts?
Good question. So members of a collaborative incur the liability of the organization. So similar to our regional agreement where the DESI suggested that we change the regional agreement so it doesn't say it's between the towns and the district. It's not. It's between the towns to create the district. So similarly, the Crest Collaborative, the North Shore Consortium, exist because however many, 12, 15, 20 communities came together to say, we want to form this organization. So is there a liability? Absolutely. Again, having been part of this for the last 2 years, this is a better liability. It's all in. This is a better operational cost. It's better debt, if you will, long-term. I also don't see us, remember, we were part of, what did it used to be? Not Greater Newburyport. Greater Lawrence. I was going to Greater Newburyport. My gosh, that goes back 20 years. So Greater Lawrence Educational Collaborative, we stepped away. We'll call that very hard times for the collaborative. We didn't want anything to do with it. It was going in a wrong direction. Kim Oliveira came in as the executive director and over years has done a nice job turning things around, has a great team. So we meet 6 times a year. We're looking at financials. I'm actually on their finance whatever committee. So I'm signing warrants on a weekly basis. I'm looking at every dollar they're spending. So it's a much better run organization. So this is a very wise decision as far as how dollars are spent. So to answer this question directly, yes, our dollars directly feed into these costs for students we have enrolled in that program.
Karen?
So how is that going to change the costs that we're incurring right now? Did they talk about that at all?
Yep. It would
And
not change, there would be no impact to this for rates for next year.
What about transportation for us? Is that going to increase the hourly
Another good
distance?
question. So if you look at Google Maps, Branch is very close to the kind of 213 interchange on 93, the Chateau. So it's just south of that area. 20 Shattuck Road is actually in. Right, so it's just up the road. So I want to say, they told us the mile, it's 1 point something miles from the existing 9 Branch facility to 20 Shattuck, and then consolidating all of what's at Broadway is a further distance away. Again, still, it's a couple miles away, but it's bringing everything, all the transportation to one campus versus splitting. So my guess is it's cost neutral. It won't be more cost, but generally we pay by the run, we don't pay by the mile for a special ed route. That's pretty standard. So the likely is there wouldn't be any impact cost-wise, but it certainly won't raise costs. And it could help with efficiencies, having everything on one campus, so that if we had 3 of our students in 3 different programs going to the same campus, that absolutely would be an efficiency. The cost for the run's the same, but we're sharing one run rather than having to do 2 different runs.
A question, Paul, or are you? Oh, other Paul has a question. Okay. Paul?
So, Brian, one of the things you said struck a chord with me, and that was about subleasing and recouping of money. I've heard those terms thrown about in this room in the past, and I've heard subsequently that when we bought into projects, I've heard subsequently that didn't pan out, the subleasing or the money coming back or the reimbursement. So I hope whoever's involved in this has really done their homework about the ability to sublease and get money back into it, because if they're buying a bigger campus and like the town of Rowley only uses 40% of its water plant, I don't want to see Crest get involved in that. I don't want to see that liability fall back on us.
Absolutely, but we've never, what do we sublease here?
Well, there was a discussion about the stadium and the upkeep costs, and we were going to rent it, and I don't think that's borne fruit, that's all.
Yes, very different daily rentals versus finding a new tenant to occupy the building. Absolutely. But
Same principle.
Yep, absolutely. As I noted, even the financials that Eric has put together assume it doesn't get. So the worst case scenario is assuming it doesn't get sublet, which obviously there's an uptick for 5 years, but even then, ultimately, long-term, over the long-term 20, 25-year life, it's absolutely a better financial plan. So worst case, even if it doesn't get subleased, it's still a better plan.
Okay.
But they're confident, at the property manager, they're using at least 50% of the cost, and they believe it'll be 75% of the cost. Could be 100, who knows, but they're assuming 50.
Okay.
Very different than the stadium.
I take it you ate your Wheaties this morning?
Well, it just,
Feeling
I
fired
hear
up.
these things.
He was all fired up.
I hear these
I can
things, and
tell.
they ring bells in the dust in the back of my head, And I got Bernie over there,
Any further questions? I think you hit all, I had seen this ahead of time since we were going through the agenda, but I think you hit all my points, and then the other one was the student experience, which will be quite a bit better with them all the students being on the same campus, so
Absolutely.
those were my concerns.
Thank you for your feedback. You do not need a vote.
You don't need a vote. Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Item C, we're going to whiz right through. So this is just the official notification that Joanna True's term on the Whittier School Committee is coming to an end on March 31st, 2020. We are opening the window for letters of interest. They can come either on paper or they can come electronically. If they come on paper, they should go to my attention at the superintendent's office. And if they come electronically, they can be sent to me via email. Sometimes it comes in the not it, right? Sometimes it comes in the body of the email, that's totally fine, or some people send an attached PDF. So it can go to narissa.wallen@tritonschools.org, that's also up on the website, and we'll be accepting letters of interest through the end of this month, and then it's our March 11th meeting? Yes, March 11th meeting that we'll have a vote on an appointee to take that seat. All right, moving on to the fiscal year 2021 operating budget. Is this a
Okay.
Brian or is this a Kyle?
This is, in fairness to Kyle, I think 72 hours is just not enough to wrap his head around the entire budget. So no, Kyle has been busy since Monday, actually focusing, Dave Jack, who is transitioning out, working with the document that you will get next week. So remember, you get a tentative budget next week. That's the first time you see a full budget package, whatever, 40, 45 pages with all the detail line by line. It's not in as much detail as you'll then get on March 11th with the narrative and such. But he's focusing on that document, analyzing, getting a sense of it so that whatever the decision is tonight, we'll be able to come back next week and have a solid document ready to roll for you. So you have 3 documents in front of you tonight. The first one, I will not even go through in great detail. It's 7 pages. It's the summary that you saw at the workshop on the 25th. The changes are, there was a note that for Newbury, and I apologize because I sent these right to the printer and it printed on the wrong corner. I don't know, maybe this is the right corner depending on who you are, but it's the wrong corner as far as I'm concerned. So the Newbury's capital costs weren't totaling. I think Paul had noted that in the budget request. And then also someone noted that the uniforms were not actually a must-do item. So everything else, as we talked through that day. So if you look on page 5, I believe, no, page 4, you can see that the supplies and materials, it says uniform rotation taken out of the must-do. So those are no longer, those are over in the TBD. So that is the same form, other than those 2 adjustments to correct what we talked about. If you look to the last page, you can see that the must-do column, the slight green, shows $2,114,024, $2,114,024. That is the number that I'm then working from on this document. So if you now want to take the second document, which is the other landscape document, one has 3 holes across the top. This document, and again, there's not a lot of further information in regards to documents and materials tonight. I'm updating you on new information that we've learned in regards to costs that we had assumed, as well as outlining what I'm suggesting at least goes into the budget as far as a high water mark for next week. So I'm going to do talking, but I would, and certainly Kyle's welcome. Kyle's welcome to jump in too, but if Kim or Dave, if you have information, please don't hesitate to jump in as we talk through the various things that we see changing. So to start right at the top, again, you've got the cost description on the left. You've got the 125 or January 25th must-do column. If you go all the way to the bottom, you see that 2,114,024 figure. Second column over says it's February now. February 5th recommended. And then the third column is the difference between where we were on Saturday the 25th and where we are as of today. At the top, the only thing that has changed as we have gone through several transitions with business managers and such, there were a couple extra forms that weren't listed on that original document. So on January 25th, it was showing an increase for lane change of 31,000 and change. It's now showing a change of 38,116. So that's an increase of $6,637. Those are contractual increases. That's folks notify us by December to make lane change again, or column change, which is credentials, additional credits, or professional development for instructional assistants. So only a change of $6,600 on the top. Continuing down the page, line 5, on January 25th, we were assuming 10%. There was also, the calculations were based off of the current year budget. As we've continued to go through detail to unpack this year's deficit, there was additional savings in the existing line, mostly in retirees, as folks have moved from active retiree plans to MEDEX plans, which is a Medicare supplement, which is a much more it's a much lower cost plan. So those savings are going to be seen this year, which is helping offset some rather large other deficit lines. So that was also able to be adjusted moving forward. So we do have our rates confirmed through Maya. It's a 7.6% renewal. And we're assuming at this point, the best guidance is 6% for MedX plans. Those renew on January 1 of every year. So those just renewed, what's today? So those were renewed a month and 5 days ago. We had a 0% renewal for this year. At this point, they're saying based on last year and having a 0 this year, they're assuming that we should assume 6% there. So all in with those changes, it's a $292,000 savings over where we were on January 5th. Liability and workers' compensation, that actually adjusted from an email yesterday evening that we worked with today. That's all our property and liability workers' compensation. All of those policies are going up 4 or 5%. Just to remind you that we changed from Maya, who we still have for our healthcare, over to Fred C. Church. As an agent, they have our plans and coverages with various different companies, and we're able to have one agent that has multiple options. So we have costs that were roughly the same as Maya, but significantly higher coverages in regards to liabilities, cybersecurity, a lot better coverage overall. So those policies go up $8,500. Unemployment, these bills adjust by the month at times. Just to remind you, we're a pay-as-you-go district, so we don't pay a premium for unemployment. We pay based on claims. Folks who, I think it's 2 years, folks who become unemployed, even if they've gone on and left Triton and have another job, if they become unemployed, we then still have some liability for, I believe it's 2 years. So a month ago, there was a very small bill, and then this past month, the bill went up a little bit, so we're adjusting that a tiny bit. So rather than a savings of $26,000, we're going to take it down $15,000. So that's $11,000 higher than we were on January 25th. Retirement and taxes, reassessing the Medicare. We pay in the FICA tax. Obviously, no one in the district subscribes or participates in Social Security, but the Medicare portion of the tax, we do pay as employees, and the district does match, so that's a percentage of payroll. So reassessing and a little more analyzing, we're going to pull that back down to $30,000, or back down $30,000 as far as the overall increase, which actually brings it to the same level as this year, because it looks like there might be a little bit extra, like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, not a lot of money. Special ed out of district, that line came down $60,000 since January. That is actually one student that we are very confident is coming back. That's actually half the cost of one student that we believe is coming back. But at this point in time, we're confident. We know they're leaving their current placement. We're leaving half of it there in case it does end up being another outside placement. But we're very hopeful that that student will be coming back entirely, which would mean another $60,000 that we hope. You know, it's a moving target, but we hope, was it 5 weeks from tonight, on March 11th, we would have a little bit more clarity on that. Special ed contracted services, lines 11 down through 21, did not change. Just to note, line 21, district-wide athletics must do. I'm calling that no change, because technically that was a higher line, but that's now matching the summary that was clarified to show that those uniforms are not must do. So from where we were on January 25th, we're collectively down $356,000. Any questions on that? Then over the page, lines 22 through 31 represent information that we are recommending, at least at this point, are included in the high water mark. Line 22, $28,256, this was the total that Kim had proposed. That we had talked about funding that over 2 years. Actually, that number does fund the implementation over 2 years for grades 6, 7, and 9, but also included in the costs are Chromebooks for grades 6, 7, and 9, because in all likelihood, Social studies and history is obviously one of those. Well, history doesn't change since yesterday, but social studies is always evolving, so having current textbooks that are web-based and online versions are much more appropriate. So that 28,000 put in doesn't have to get increased next year. That allows new leases for new Chromebooks for history and social studies teachers in grades 6, 7, and 8. I'm saying 6, 7, and 9, and also assumes a 2-year implementation cost for the software subscription services. Does that make sense?
So is this is 28,000 for the next 2 years? I mean, at the last meeting, there was a possibility of paying half and half?
So this is
This
that
is
was my
half and
lack
half?
of clarity. It actually was assuming half and half, but baked into that number are the cost for Chromebooks as well.
Okay, so this is
This would be here
half
for
of
2
it
years.
plus Chromebooks.
Paying half of the 59, it's in
Right.
the detail, half of the subscription cost over 2 years, plus the cost of Chromebooks starting the leases. So yes, that same number would be there again next year. Yes. Probably easier we'll do questions as I go one by one, because some of these. Line 23, straightforward, it's the first year of a 3-year phase-in. Straight up, that's just like we talked about, that would take our tuition from currently tuition of $2,950 to a tuition of $2,000. And these numbers actually fluctuate based on enrollment and students who are waived because of free and reduced lunch, but it's roughly a $75,000 cost, and the tuition we would set at $2,000. I think that's pretty straightforward. So that's year 1 of a 3-year phase-in. That would get us to a tuition-free full-day kindergarten by 2023, fiscal 2023. So September of 2022, we would be enrolling students with no cost for free full-day K. So depending on the numbers, it would be nice if, as things shift, maybe that number gets a little smaller if there's, if we have to backfill and figure it out. But at this point, that funds year 1. On the other side of the page, I noted that we took out the athletic uniforms. Part of that reduction was assumed, knowing Tim assumed those reduction in other areas so that he could fund about half of the new uniform rotation. Have had the opportunity to see some of these uniforms and fully endorse spending that $25,000 for a uniform rotation. Number 27, reduction of 1 teacher at Salisbury. You remember there was a teacher in the 6th grade. There are currently 4 sections. Next year, the current 5th grade has 3 sections. So we're losing 1 section of 6th grade just through attrition, not because of, not to change class sizes. Jim in his budget had proposed bringing that teacher down to the current 2nd grade going into 3rd grade, taking class sizes from 22 to roughly 16 and change. Would be great, would be ideal. I think given the consideration, and as we talked with the leadership team, Jim didn't disagree when there's a potential savings there of $90,000. That savings that we need to realize. So that is due to a retirement, so there's no unemployment costs. It's just straight, the whole kit and caboodle is a savings. Line 28, proposing adding 1 halftime ETC. I assume there'll probably be some discussion about this. The thinking was, I guess we'll kind of take those two, 28 and 29, so it's a halftime ETC and the special education teacher at the middle school. So our thinking is, there was lots of discussion about BCBAs and those services. We have 2 full-time people. This is the first year we've had 2 full-time people that were not contract. So as we discussed around the table with the leadership team, we're still trying to figure out exactly how most efficiently to use those. We're used to paying someone to come in, provide services, and they walk out the door. So we have one that was stationed, if you will, primarily at Newbury for the ASD program. We believe there's some capacity to use her services. They work as a team, but to provide services elsewhere. This teacher at the middle school is addressing students, as Al had presented with his budget, not necessarily behaviors, but certainly mental health issues, students who are chronically in the student services suite, not able to return to classes. Obviously, if a student's not able to get into school, that's a whole other discussion, but these are students who are they're just not able to make it into the classroom. So by putting that special education teacher in the middle school, that's going to address a more global concern for an additional program, if you will. There won't be a label for this program, but an additional classroom that will allow these students to have a licensed educator with them, and then provide less of a need for those other support services. So that allows us to reallocate and use the BCBA services more efficiently and effectively. Is it ideal to have a BCBA at every school? Absolutely. But in the grand scheme of things, trying to make sure that as we came down in savings, I wanted to be a lot lower than the 2.1 million, but at this point, if we're talking high water mark, at least stay, certainly not any higher than we were before. These are where we landed with the priorities. We believe the BCBA services, we can reallocate and work them, work the schedule of those services more effectively. Put the special education teacher at the middle school, and then the halftime evaluation team chair. Actually, the discussion of where we landed was, we've been having discussion for many years about transitions, whether we're talking about transitions for special education or transitions for super high achieving student or average in the middle student. Transitions are hard, especially when you're coming from 3 towns into one combined middle school. So the kind of latest and greatest thinking around the table was, if we kept our halftime ETCs at the elementary school, and they focused on, currently they're pre-K through 6, they focus on pre-K through 5. Then we have a halftime ETC that focuses on at least 6 and 7, maybe 6, 7, 8, however that works, but put another halftime ETC on this campus so that we can have the same ETC, and again, evaluation team chair, the person who chairs and coordinates the meetings, have the same person coordinating the IEP meetings and process in 6th grade and again in 7th grade. So there's one person that has eyes on and is managing, obviously it's all under the principal's administration, but administering that process so that there's a single point of contact in both the 6th grade and the 7th grade. So then that transition to a new team chair actually happens in the 5th grade, when that student is still in their home elementary school. And we haven't talked about exactly how that works, but I envisioned it as that ATC coming onto the elementary turf, if you will, become familiar there. We have the new face. We then move that person up, and then they're working that transition more effectively. There's still a discussion about how then you share 8th through 12th in the 18 to 22 program out of district. So it's not the ideal of having a full-time ETC at every school, but we believe that's the critical need as far as where we're seeing the greatest stress in regards to the overall continuum of services there. So should I stop there? I think those are kind of two tied in, or is that?
Questions? My first reaction on seeing this ETC is I love that idea of having the 6 to 7 being carried through by one person, because I think that makes a lot of sense for those students. It's really, really tough, from what I understand, coming from the 3 elementary schools in 6th grade and then everybody coming over here in 7th grade, and kind of maintaining services and making sure they get what they need, in addition to the stresses of the transition itself. So I really like that
Certainly
idea.
welcome Dave or Kim to jump in, but I mean, just the structure, right? Just the structure of going from an elementary
Please
school.
jump in.
Yeah, so, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say just to go from the structure of the elementary to the structure of a middle school with a confined rotating schedule, it's just a different animal.
Yeah, and I think this solution provides relief to both ends. So it also, because we had our leadership meeting and everybody was in agreement that if we had to come up with a sort of alternative, what would be the most helpful to start building back capacity? Because then it would take the 6th grade meetings also off of the ETCs at the elementary schools, because they're also halftime teachers. So that would alleviate something on their end, and then it would solve or help with the transitions, and then provide support to the middle and high school, which has over 200, I think right now there's one person that has over 220 meetings per year, and trying to schedule, service providers and part-time people. So I think we all were in agreement that this was a priority and a good solution. And then I think, and then as years go on, try to build it up each year and improve on it. So everybody was in full agreement.
Any questions on that one, comments? All right.
Okay, so 2 more to go. Halftime custodian at the elementary level, we talked about that. That restores Pine Grove School from back to where it was 2 years ago when we had that discussion and thought it would be a short-term thing. They went from 2.5 down to 2, so they would have a halftime. They would have 2.5 total. And then at Salisbury and Newbury, bigger square footage buildings, they would go back from 2.5 to 3. So those are allocated based on total square footage being cleaned each night. So again, because it's adding a halftime, benefits already exist. It's to be able to have that impact, large-scale impact over 3 buildings for, in the grand scheme of things, short money, as we went across and through the list and tried to prioritize what are the most important things to do. And then finally, there, 31 is the elimination of the parking fee. I can tell you're going to hear something from students. You're going to hear some voices, and I know some went to Patrick and said, we want to talk about the parking fee. And he said, just so you know, there's a discussion that it being eliminated. And they were hoping to come in and say, cut it somewhat. It's killing me. So I think that $20,000 is an important step and statement to students, as Maureen, I believe you've said several times. User fees, athletic fees, kindergarten tuitions, pre-K fees, tuitions, generally parents are paying those. More often than not, students are raising those fees themselves, and oftentimes they have to drive because they have a job to go raise the fees. So all in, with all of those changes, that actually adds $285,000 back in. So we're $70,858 lower than we were on January 25th. Before I go to the next page, just on the bottom there are 5 bulleted lines. So there are 5 other areas that we're watching that could have some or some significant added relief to this current bottom line. As I mentioned, just that one tuition, we cut out 60 of the 120. That could go to a full $120,000 savings, which is another 60. There are other moving parts as far as a handful of tuitions, which then would have corresponding savings in the transportation line. So both in special education and in tuitions for special education and in special education transportation, there's a potential that comes down. It could be none at all. It could be a small amount. It could be a fairly sizable amount. But that as I said, we've got 5 weeks until a final budget is approved by you, and I'm hoping that we have a little bit more clarity on those evolving situations as we go. The third bullet down, I believe on the 25th, I explained to you that the increased circuit breaker that we received for next year, it assumes a full 75% reimbursement, and it assumes the new threshold that was set by the Student Opportunity Act. So rather than it going up to $48,000 and change, it's $45,000 and change. So every dollar over that amount, so that lower amount gave us more money. All of that had been assumed and is assumed on line, special ed tuitions. I should put my glasses on. What line is that? That's line 9. So all those changes already assumed in those savings on line 9. The additional change is there's a workshop actually on Friday morning, supposed to be going. Now they're doing, I think it got a little overwhelmed, so they're doing a Zoom conference. So we'll be listening on Friday morning to exactly how that reimbursement for circuit breaker transportation is going to work. The only thing I know is talking on the phone with Jay is he said it's not going to have anything to do with tuitions and services. So I don't know if there will be a threshold or if they're just going to assume that they're going to reimburse all transportation at the certain levels. But for year 1, which is fiscal 21, we can claim 25% of our costs. Year 2, we can claim 50. Year 3, we can claim 75. And then in 2025, fiscal 25, we can claim 100% of special ed transportation costs. So in the perfect world, that's upwards of $400,000 by the 4th year. That was rough calculations as we were kind of talking about how that would work. I did hear Jay Sullivan talk about the fact that they're assuming that basically all transportation for out-of-district students will be reimbursable because of the fact that most tuitions are at least $45,792, which is the current threshold. So we're hopefully that will be a chunk of money, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000. I don't think we'll have a number by Friday, but we'll at least be a little bit less in the dark after Friday morning's workshop or training. Charter funding, this is a figure that tends to get increased in the budget, not any factors within the Chapter 70 calculation, but actual charter funding. This year in fiscal 20, there was an extra $7.5 million put in for districts that were seeing larger growth and higher numbers. Our numbers went from 44 to 57, I believe. So we got that additional money. So where we thought we would have a huge deficit in charter, it's a small deficit. That roughly $90,000 we won't get next year at this point. That could change. The state could do the same thing that they did throughout the budget process last year. So that would certainly be an additional potential relief. And then finally, regional transportation, the current figure, this is not an official DESI number. This is Julie Kelly, who seems to be a better communicator than anyone at the Department of Ed, with all due respect, the Department of Ed. Those numbers are calculated at roughly 80.5%. Fiscal 19 landed at 82% with the supplemental budget. Fiscal 20, the current year, is projected at 85%. So that could get to 85, that could get to 90, you never know. Bruce Tarkin, or Senator Tarkin, start his magic begging now, and maybe we get more in that line. So that's where the numbers are at this point as far as recommendation and changes. The last document you have.
Maureen?
I just want to ask a quick question. So there was a lot of discussion about the math specialists. Is that
It was.
leadership discuss that? Because I don't see that on here.
So did we discuss it? Yep, we discussed class sizes, we discussed math specialists. There was something else we had around the table for a while. Is it needed? Absolutely. Is it a priority? Where we landed was these were the priorities given where we're at, with the assumption that even $2,043,000 is a number that we're not sure the towns can afford, right? Or maybe we can confidently say they can't afford it. So with that as the benchmark, it didn't rise onto this list of priorities. Is it a priority? Absolutely. Yeah.
Gina?
So Maureen asked the one thing. The other things that I was looking at that I haven't heard mentioned, the consumer math books that are 30 years old, is that going to be somehow absorbed in the high school supply line, or are we not going to worry about that at this point?
I'm not sure about that.
I believe, sorry, they're still looking at different resources, but I believe that it's going to be absorbed in the high school line.
Good. The other thing is, at the high school, the ventilation in the ceramics room was a safety concern. Is that going to be taken care of?
So that was an $8,000 assumption. It came in under $1,500 and will be done, actually will be done before this year is done.
Awesome.
Simply because it needs to be done at this point.
And the last question I have is technology personnel that Deb wanted, that they're overwhelmed already and down one now. How's that going to be addressed? And I really didn't see any changes in technology. Are we still moving towards one-to-one, or are we waiting for the technology working group to finalize their recommendation?
Yes, on your final point. So the lines, overall, the lines are down $7,200. That's contract subscriptions, antivirus, a million other things that I can't remember. So all of the lines are down because of contract cycles. We actually have, in the personnel report, Devin, right? I'm remembering his name, a new technician starting the 12th, I believe, in the personnel report for next week. That's why you haven't seen it yet. It's next week. Too many agendas. So that, Devin, I believe, is starting on the 12th, which is next Wednesday. So that, Brett moved into the network administrator position, Jeremy to the senior technician, that technician was replaced. So they're back to full staff as they have expected it, or have had it for the last 2 years. Could we use another one? Unequivocally, yes. Are wait times for help desk tickets longer? Absolutely. Is it a priority when we start talking about this level? It's just not. Is it a priority? Unequivocally, yes. So then the second piece of that question was one-to-one. Deb had looked at a tech integration specialist. Patrick Kelly, the principal at the high school, had used a different term. I forget the term, without looking in the binder. Was more of an educator on working with teachers to use technology. So the work, this does not put anything new into place. I believe over the course of the next year, whether it's developing this technology blueprint or looking at all of the myriad lease cycles that we have, trying to be creative to get to a point where we could say, whether it's a 1-year phase-in, 2-year phase-in, 3-year phase-in, 4-year phase-in, to put a new Chromebook in the hands of every freshman coming in. Could we do freshman and sophomore year 1? So what we need to do is have the plan and then look at all the existing devices and say, could we do it? Because at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be an astronomical number per year. So I think if we can phase that in 2 years and in the fall of '21, put a device in 2 grade levels' hands, those kids keep them for 4 years. At the end, if there's a value, they can buy it, or if they turn it in and we return the lease. But with that requires staffing. It requires the position that Patrick had suggested in regards to making sure that we're making use of that technology. And then it opens up a whole other opportunity of having that person, an additional tech staff person, and additional integration specialist, developing a student tech crew. Because in the high schools that have gone to one-to-one, it's almost standard where there's a whole department where student interns, if you will, learn to fix the devices on Chromebooks. There's a screen, a keyboard, and a mouse, or a trackpad. There's not a whole lot to fix. So I know you can even become like a certified HP repair shop and get paid by HP to fix them. So all of that has to be part of a larger plan.
And do we have a date yet for when the technology working group is going to bring forward their recommendations?
The goal is that we would have that by the end of this year, or be ready to present by the fall. We keep talking about school improvement plans and what the timing is going to be there. I still like the fall, right before budgets, rather than completely separate. So my thought would be in that same timing.
Okay.
So it would be informing then the budget process we'd be doing a year from now.
Tina?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on the second page with the recommendations that you guys put in here. I thought you did a good job, and I appreciate trying to put full day K and phasing it in 3 years, because there's been so much chatter, and where my kids are at that level, that's all parents are talking about. And in terms of competing with other districts, I think this is going to be really huge. And even on social media and all the North Shore mom blogs, like Beverly just, they also got $1 million and more money than we did, but people don't understand that. So, and I'm sorry if I sound funny, I can't hear out of my right ear. It's, I don't know, I think I have an ear infection, but I think that's great. And I think the elimination of student parking fees too, because one of the things I'm working at that we've talked about is looking at the great schools ratings and how to change those, and students can actually go back and put reviews for the school districts. So I think if we can keep the students happy too and show like our willingness to help them with the fees, like that would be huge, because there's ways that we can get our ratings up, and I think that would be one of them. So I just wanted to make that comment, but I think all of these would make sense to me, and I would vote for them.
I was going to say there are definitely districts that are going to start abolishing fees, and when you sit with administrators and you hear them saying, we're not sure what we're going to do with all the money, it's maddening. That wasn't Beverly. I'm not talking about Beverly. But other districts that are receiving a lot more money, that's a really frustrating statement to hear from an administrator, that literally they can't figure out how to spend the money. So
They could give it to.
I was just going to say, I have lots of needs. So the one other thing I would say in regards to full day K, depending on how much we believe that this is going to be an issue, that every day that goes by, I feel like it's going to be more and more of an issue. I feel like we're going to lose, we had a choice issue this year. I feel like next year we could easily have another impact. So the differential between phasing it over 2 years versus 3 years, rather than 75,000 a year, what's 225 by 112.50? So 112,500, so a difference of, what was that, 30 some odd thousand? We could do it, 37.5, we could do it over a 2-year phase-in. So again, depending on priorities as we move forward, that would then drop the tuition to 1,500. So it would go 1,500 in fiscal '21 and then 0, and we would have to commit roughly 112.5 or whatever that number is called, $115,000. So that's $40,000 more, but as we move forward, I think forget about any of our beliefs about full day or half day kindergarten. That is literally irrelevant in the discussion of if this gets forced on us, we will have no choice. Secondly, it's a competition and we're going to lose students because of it. I firmly believe it's the right thing to do as well for students. But if you take all the other factors, there's an argument to say that we need to do more now. There are other districts, Beverly, just done, from tuition to 0. Pentucket's talking about it. They're also having other budget challenges, so it's a much higher, they're still charging $4,000, so they have a bigger gap to fill. But if we're surrounded by free full day K, we're gonna lose kids, 5,000. Everyone that leaves is $5,000. So if that's 40,000, what did I say the number was, $40,000 difference? That's 8 students. If 8 students leave, we paid the same money anyway. So.
And I will say, I asked on the MASC listserv because I was curious of all these districts who are dropping their costs or their fees down to nothing for full-day kindergarten. And I said, how are you doing it? And the response I got from them all was, well, you just need to get over your first gap year. And I was like, but we don't have a first gap year. We need to own this number forever. So I think while some of the districts are in the same boat as us, where they're in hold harmless and they won't receive an additional bump, I haven't looked at Beverly's numbers in particular, but I think they essentially recoup a fair amount of that money next year. It's only that first year that's a big year for them.
If they got new money, they're not in hold harmless, so.
Yeah. Yeah, Deb.
This isn't rocket science, but if we approve a budget that includes the beginnings, whether it's a 3-year or 2-year phase, and that became public knowledge, I would think that would be helpful to people coming up, because Tina's talking about young people with young children. So if we could get Ketty on an article that says, we're
Absolutely.
doing this,
Yeah.
even if it is a 3-year.
Yep. Yeah. And especially if there is a commitment from the committee to say, regardless of what happens,
Right.
even if it means fill in the blank, that we're committing to this, then absolutely that's a statement. Next year free, great. 2 years free, not quite as great. 3 years, still great, but. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
A lot of these families do have their oldest going into kindergarten with a preschooler right behind them too. So I think that would make a big difference. But I hear it even from parents and former educators that are retired that have worked in surrounding districts that it's ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. And then I talk to them about the budget and they were like, well, yeah, I know that too. But so again, it's not an argument about beliefs.
Right. Absolutely.
So, but I think it would make a difference. So that's something that I support.
Comments? All right, my one is that I feel like the one thing that this is missing is the future health of the district. I'm going to go back on my OPEB kick and say, I feel like it's missing here.
It is.
It is?
It was up here. Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, so on that note, Brian, I was half reading this, and you said something about talking to all these other administrators that they didn't know what to do with the extra money. What exactly were you saying? Because I was half invested in this.
So other administrators from other district
Right.
that is getting millions more in Chapter 70 for next year.
Okay, but like, so what about E&D? What about a sped, what do you call it, rainy day fund, for lack of whatever you
Oh,
call it?
if we were getting it, we
Right.
absolutely.
And then the kicker is OPEB.
Yep.
You know, even $1 million, what's that going to do to OPEB?
Yep.
So,
I will say, a lot of them are already contributing to OPEB. They're literally having this conversation, the one district, which shall remain nameless, is having this conversation of, can they really afford to cut the $150,000 that they're putting into OPEB every single year in order to fund, or in order to reduce the tuitions on their kindergarten to get to full day K?
right, but by the same token, I think Brian would support the notion that there are communities and school committees out there that say, OPEB what? What is OPEB again?
yeah, there
So
are
I
some.
don't want the communities the people that are listening to think that we're not addressing it. We are, we're keeping it in front of it, you're keeping it in front of us, and we need to address it, but I think there are other communities that are in worse positions than we are.
Yeah, I think the discussion that we had briefly at DCC last week, this is our Moody's, we have the lowest bond rating of any of the three towns. We're lower, and we have a negative forecast. And they specifically point to low balances. We don't have any stabilization funds, and our E&D is certified at 417. And then the continued use of those balances, whether we're putting it as a revenue source in the budget, or we're taking a vote in April, which we've had to do each year. So the discussion we had at the table with the town officials is, this is when we borrow, right, when we get to the point, it's not happening anytime soon, but when we get to the point of another capital project, it has to be in our name if it's happening on this campus. So the towns are gonna pay that. So putting 20,000 in, 25,000 in, it's a token, it's a statement to Moody's or whoever does our rating. Back off, always having to rely on E&D, and we first get rid of that negative forecast, and then after that, then we can start to argue to say, we should go back to whatever rating we believe is fair. So, yes, OPEB should be in there. So you're down, wow, I can't see anything without my glasses. So you're 70,858 from your your January meeting. Do you want to use the 2114 as the worst case high water mark and put in, so basically OPEB, if put the difference between take full day K to 2-year phase in and put in 2025, whatever the delta is there, get you still a couple thousand below where you were as your high water. Knowing that, depending how things move forward, and if there aren't savings in other areas, we're probably coming back to trim this. But in setting your high water mark, do you want a 2-year phase in rather than a 3-year phase in? And do you want OPEB in there in the high water mark?
Paul?
Sorry about that. I think OPEB definitely needs to be in there. We need to look out for that long-term future because we know this building has some issues.
It's coming.
I think with the full day K that the 3-year phase in or the 2-year phase in is probably buying us the same goodwill, but I do think it is a valuable expenditure to say we're trying to get there. Speaking people on my street who I know are thinking about choicing out.
Do you think there's more value in a 2-year phase in versus a 3-year?
Not much.
I agree with what he said completely. I think the fact that we make a move to reduce kindergarten tuition, to eliminate kindergarten tuition, if we play that out there in the press, as he's gone, he's gone. Anyway, if we put that out there, I think whether it's not going to matter to people whether it's so much as whether it's a 3-year or 2-year phase in. The fact that we're doing it, it's going to happen. But even if it's 10 or 20,000 to put into OPEB, I think that makes, I agree with what he said completely.
Other opinions? So my preference, just to put my own opinion in there, is to leave the full day K at the 75,000. I cannot imagine that we are not going to find 20 or 25,000 to put in OPEB in these additional revenue opportunities that you have down the bottom. I would rather leave it at the 2043 166 for next week. Vote that, and we'll find somewhere in there. We'll find that amount for OPEB, whatever it is, at some point down the road. That's my personal.
We're going to get something for SOA, circuit breaker transportation, because if we don't, the whole bill's a lie. So how much it is, then we don't know, but we will get some money. So even if you were to say, take a vote, whatever that comes in at, or assuming it's going to be 58,000, say we're earmarking 50 of that. Once you put a line in, it doesn't have to be an increase year over year. So if we can get a $25,000 line that's in there on a total spend of 44 million, it's I mean, a minuscule portion, but to start paying down that $70 million liability, it's a statement. And then it doesn't have to be an increase every year.
I agree. I think there's upside in the regional transportation line, too. It would be really nice if we had a DESI number. I'll just say that aloud. I know that I said that to Rep. Hill when I was talking to him earlier this week, and he was going to go see if he could find a rate number for us. When I was talking to Julie Kelly about that 80.5%, that's based on the traditional year-over-year increase that they've factored in. So it's traditionally a 3.5% increase every year. So she's working that number just separate from DESI off of the historical projections. But if it's in fact 80.5% or even close to there, I think that there's going to be a huge uproar, because they made it to 85% last year. And if you're walking us back 5%, essentially back to the same rate that we were in 2018, I think there's going to be some legislators that are very upset about that. And I can see them refusing to let that number be walked back. Yeah.
I should say, yes, but there are others with considerable clout who believe that regional transportation is wrong.
This is true.
And have told me that very publicly and happily. Because it's not fair, because they don't get it.
Yes, I agree.
So, and also the reality is our contract costs for transportation are going up 9.8% next year, which means theoretically, if we're getting funding of 80%, assume roughly 10% of the costs are not reimbursable because we're transporting kids inside a mile and a half. So, you know, we could get, of that $141,000 increase, we might get 80 of that back the following year in regional transportation. So there's one single upside to increase transportation costs. So I'm hearing we're good with the $2,043,000. You don't want to go over that.
That's my opinion. I don't know if that's the opinion of the rest of the committee.
I was just going to say that I do agree with you, Narissa, and your statement that if we can stay at that number and try to find money in the future savings for OPEB, I think that should be a priority.
I was trying to break $2 million. That's the high water mark. Trying to get it to $1,999,999. It just, the numbers aren't there with the priorities that we're setting. So, I mean, things could change, right? We have 7 days until some things could be clear, and we could save, you know, we could save the 43,000 plus, and we might be able to come back to you and say, we're going to put 20 into OPEB and still be at 2 million. I don't know. But I'm hearing people agreeing that the 2,043,000 is the high water mark, and we're going to work from that.
I don't see anybody disagreeing. So, Tina?
I am.
I see no harm in going with the higher number so that we get our must-dos as the high water mark, knowing that cuts will have to be made. Just my personal opinion.
So I would just say, so the must-dos dropped by 356,000. So just so that we're clear in regards to a level services, if we're saying a level services budget to take this operation that you see in any of our schools today into next year, it would drop by 356,000. We're adding back in 285. All obviously huge, high priority spending, but if we're talking about a true level services must-do, it could come down.
I just say, I think that the thing that I would say about that is substitutes, we're paying for them regardless of. You have the increase of the 25,000 in the new items, but in reality, that's, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's probably, I mean, the only thing that on that, and that fluctuates. So again, going back to true must-do,
Yep.
yes, that's pretty darn sure we're going to do. But everything else is obviously, as we've said, very, very, very much needed. And I mean, there's several things that I would say is flat out unwise to not do. But just to make sure that we're clear on, these are restoring, it's mostly restoration or adding.
Any further guidance for Brian?
How about for Kyle? Do you have guidance for Kyle? Just kidding. So, oh yes, I'm sorry. So I thought I went there and came back to it. I haven't gone there yet. So with all of those assumptions, the third document is 2 sheets, 2-sided. The second page, the second double-sided page has not changed at all. That's the enrollments and the capital calculation. But that $2,043,000 that you have on the backside, the bottom line of that page we were just reviewing, is the top line here on the assessment page. Takes the budget to takes the budget to $44,519,871. The only other thing that changed is, as far as revenues, I increased regional transportation to that 80.5% assumption, and assumed $15,000 in homeless reimbursement. So that did give us additional, that is, how much? I don't remember how much higher that is then. So that assessment is higher. Hang on. It's going to take me longer than that to find it. So it was, we were assuming 869. So that went from an increase of 20. So that increased about $68,000 since January 25th. So it came down about $70,000 on the expenditures. Revenues went from should have kept that page open. We were assuming 47,000 in new revenues. Now we're assuming 115,000 in new revenues. So the assessments, when we met on January 25th, was a total of $2,091,000. It's currently $1,927,000. So, so it was a 6.42%. It's now a 5.92%. Assessments were 563 to Newbury, 533 to Rowley, and 994 to Salisbury. On this paper, they're showing an increase of 516 to Newbury, 481 to Rowley, and 930 to Salisbury. And the rest of those pages have the for discussion only, because that's just the calculation that gets to our current thinking. I apologize, I thought I had gone over that. Does that change anything? I think. Change anything as far as the guidance? Okay, just making sure.
Seeing none?
Motion to adjourn. Oh, that's not my role, sorry.
Yes, exactly. So our next regular meeting would be February 12th, 2020. That's next Wednesday here in the high school library at 7 p.m. We also, just looking at the dates ahead, we have our public hearing scheduled for February 27th. So that's coming up as well. If there are people who have feedback for us, you can reach us at schoolcommittee@tritonschools.org, funnel information in through the principals, through Brian. I mean, it can all come back to us. public comment is here, the hearing is coming up. There are going to be lots of opportunities to speak, so please go ahead and do that, whether you're a student, a family, teacher, whatever you happen to be. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please? Oh, wait. All right, is that
Brian,
enough?
I'm hoping it's Christmas, and I'm just going to ask you for something. Before these meetings that we have coming up, if we could get these annexes, I know you're shorthanded, but if you could work your best to get them to us before the meeting. 'Cause
Yeah, absolutely.
all these things, if you could, because
Yep.
it's a lot easier to look at these in advance and have to do it while we're doing it, and then I got to go back and ask you stupid questions because I was reading this and not hearing you. But besides that, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
So I was just going to say, so whenever possible, you're getting them. This literally changed today. So if I had given it to you, I was trying to get it to you last night, it would have been wrong, would have been off by $11,000. But the full budget document, we will try like heck to get it to you ahead of time, but I would guess that it's going to take a week to put that all together to make sure it all lines up. But if we can get it to you even 24 hours ahead and get it to you in PDF, absolutely we will. Yep.
Thank you.
Pretty sure Kyle has it done already, actually.
He did. I think he's sleeping over tonight, so I think he was good to go. And tomorrow night and the weekend.
Just kidding. Can I get a second
I'll
on the motion? to
second
adjourn?
Paul's motion.
Any discussion? All in favor? Thank you all.
Did I just steal your pen?
If it says secret